All right, we can get started. So hello, everybody. YouTube can now see this as well. I hope so anyway. Either that or I'll just talk to myself and I'll think it was recording and it wasn't, and I'll learn from the experience after. So we're doing one of our weekly how to teach a foreign language sessions today. So we have some people that are watching live, obviously in our Google Meet, and then we're gonna have some people probably watching live on YouTube as well, which will be good. Let me do a screen share for the YouTube people because I think you guys can't see right now. Let me share the PowerPoint that we're going to go through. There we go. Perfect. So the topic for today is what to do when students aren't progressing. I feel like a lot of people experience this, and so I thought it's a good topic for us to go through. Very quick intro on me. I know a lot of you watching probably know, but some of you might not know a lot about me. So I'm from Calgary. It's a city in Canada. I love learning languages and teaching languages. I majored in French and Spanish in university. I graduated 6.5 years ago. I ran a window cleaning business for 5.5 years, which is where I learned a lot of the skills that I use now to work for myself in the field of language learning. If you don't know what I do for work, I run what's called the Calgary Language Nerds, excuse me. So it's a business that basically think of it like a tutoring business for foreign languages specifically. So we tutor for French and Spanish and English and Mandarin and German and a variety of other languages. I love traveling. I'm a big traveler, obviously, when COVID is not happening. And then teaching is also a very big passion of mine. So I've liked teaching for a very long time, and I've taught lots and lots when it comes to foreign languages. And also on my previous job, training and coaching was a massive part of my previous job as well. Probably worth noting that typically a lot of the stuff I share in these sessions here tends to be from the context of my tutoring business, and often will not be in the context of like a classroom teacher and a school board. Sometimes there's things that will transfer over to both. Like there's certain things that'll apply in both contexts, and sometimes that's not the case. I think the things we talk about today, again, is probably relevant to both, but skews a little bit more to people who are tutors or who run a tutoring business. So, okay, let's dive in. So what do we do when students aren't progressing? I think the first thing in my perspective that we have to look at is, why are they not progressing? And usually there's two things that we have to think about. Number one, what is your role in their lack of progress? And second of all, what is the student's role in their lack of progress? So what is your role? You have to take some responsibility for their lack of progress. There's something that you've not been doing properly that is contributing to them not progressing. So, for example, I can think of there's a group class I'm currently running, and probably 4 months in, probably 3 months or 4 months into the group class, like I remember thinking to myself, like, these guys are not, like, they're not moving forward. Like they still can't tell me how are you, and they don't know it. And I was like, what the heck is going on? Like something's happening. And what I realized when I reflected back on it is that my personal role was that I was going a little bit too fast. I was teaching a little bit too much information, and I wasn't doing enough review of old material. I wasn't confirming that people understood. That was kind of what my role was when I was thinking back on it. Now, typically, it's not only just your responsibility. The students also got a role. It's not 100% your responsibility. So why is this, what's going on in the students' minds and in the students' lives that they're not progressing? So for example, the group class I just mentioned, they did nothing between class. No homework, no study, no practice. In fact, even in the class, there's a few of them that I could see their minds are elsewhere. They're not listening. So I'm like, okay, so they're not listening in class and they're not doing homework. So even when they're doing 2 hours of class a week, of that 2 hours of teaching time, they're really only getting an hour out of it. And then also that reflects back to point number one. Why aren't they listening in class? What am I doing that they're not paying attention? Clearly, I'm not doing a very good job here. Something's not going right. Something's going on. So the first thing you have to look at is why are they not progressing? You have to start to look at those, because if you don't look at that first, it's very difficult to figure out what kinds of steps you have to take. You do also have to look at, are they really not progressing? Or is it just your perception that they're not progressing? It's important to look at that. Are they actually not progressing, or does it just, you just think they're not progressing? Because that's happened to me, where I'm like, man, they're not progressing. They're learning so slow. But then when I really take a step back and I look at how many hours, by the way, I apologize for all these red lines. I think my PowerPoint must be in like Spanish or something, so it thinks I'm mistyping everything. Regardless, I apologize for that. But for example, like I've thought of students where I'm like, they're not progressing. But when I take a step back and I look at how many hours of class have they taken and how much homework have they done? Like how much time have they put into the language? And when I look at that number, often it's been like 30 hours or 25 hours, 50 hours. I'm like, okay, they've done 47 hours roughly of work. And let's look at how much they've progressed. Oh, okay. It's not that they're not progressing. It's that they've only put in 47 hours of work. It feels like a long time because I've worked with them for 9 months now, but 47 hours over 9 months is not a very long time. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm actually worrying over nothing. Right? So that actually might tie into number two. Your expectations might just be too high. You might think they should be at a certain point because it's been 9 months or 12 months or whatever. And when you start to look at how much they've actually done, how much time they've put into the language, you realize, oh, actually, maybe that's realistic, actually. In fact, maybe this slide should even go before this slide. Maybe this should be the first thing you think about. Are they really not progressing? Or are they not progressing? Or am I just viewing this through the wrong lens? Now, let's assume that they really haven't progressed, which does happen, or they're progressing very slowly. There's a few reasons as to why it tends to happen, in my experience. Let me actually zoom in just a bit so you can see it a bit bigger. There we go. There's a few reasons why it happens. So the first one is actually what I mentioned earlier, is that you're teaching too many concepts way too fast. Right? There's too many concepts happening and you're just teaching too fast. In which case, the solution is pretty straightforward. You got to slow down. Right? So a great example, I've got a private student who I have taught now for about 2 years. She's not the most dedicated student. She's dedicated in terms of like, she will consistently come to class and she tries, but she's got a very busy work life and blah, blah, blah. But her progress has been slow. And I realized that there's a lot of stuff she wasn't absorbing because we're just doing too much. And so what I've done with her is we actually do not do anything new anymore. And this is actually, we agreed on this. She it's been working really well. We don't do anything new until she's mastered the old things that she's learned. Like she knows it cold. We've agreed upon that. Eventually that's going to break down. That's not going to work anymore. I might have mentioned this before, but usually once you've picked a strategy, it works really well for a few months. And then after a point, that strategy has some diminishing returns and you have to try something new. You have to kind of switch things up. So I think it'll work for a little while, but eventually that strategy will need some adjusting. But you've got to slow down, right? Because you're just teaching too many things too fast. I don't know if you guys have met people who have, I've met people who have like gotten university degrees in a foreign language, but they're not actually that strong in the language. And it's just because they've passed their classes by BSing their way through the class. Like me, I'm taking an advanced Mandarin class right now at university. And like, I don't print very well. Like I print well below the level that I should be printing at for a class of that level. And it's because I kind of like fudge my way through the writing assignments. I'll like type it out first and then I'll just like copy what I see. So I like don't have to memorize it. There's a lot of stuff I do that's just not, I'm getting through the classes, but I don't print very well. So people do that. And that's just them teaching a little bit too fast for me compared to how much homework I'm doing. So So that happens. Could be that you're not spending enough time reviewing and practicing old concepts. So I guess that might tie into the first one above, in which case you've got to spend more time reviewing and practicing. You might be using ineffective teaching methods. That one's hard to know. It's really hard to know that. Unless you've taught a lot, it's really hard to know if your teaching methods are ineffective or not. But it doesn't hurt to try a different method to see if it works better. If something feels like they're not progressing, to try something new to see if it works. Best case scenario, they learn faster. And you're like, yay, they learn faster, fantastic. Worst case scenario, nothing really changes. And now you've learned something new. And you're like, oh, so when I try that strategy, this is what tends to happen. And now you've learned something and you've become a better teacher. Maybe you've got unreasonably high expectations, in which case you got to check yourself. You've got to tell yourself, hey, okay, have reasonable expectations here. Come on, it's okay. Don't expect too much of them. And then the last one's probably one of the hardest ones, to be honest. The students have not mentally committed to learning the language, excuse me. So that happens in adult classes, happens in kids classes, happens in a variety of different classes. And, you know, that one is a little bit harder to change and a little bit harder to, you can't force someone to mentally become committed. You can't force them. All you can do, there's a couple things you can do. One of which is you talk to the student, like you bring it up. You're like, hey, it doesn't seem like you really want to learn French. It doesn't seem like it. And they're like, really? Why do you think that? And you have a conversation. That is probably the number one thing you can do. You can also start to change some of the environment around the language. So I'll give you some examples. Let's say you have a class at 8 p.m. on a Monday, and it's like let's say it's a private class, 8 p.m. on a Monday, and they're just they don't seem very mentally engaged, and they're not very focused, and they might just be tired from like a long day at work, and 8 p.m. their brain's done, and a class at 5 p.m. would be way better for them. Could be something as simple as that. I've got one student in particular who works better with a tutor who works for me because they've become good friends. Because this one tutor who works for me, she's got something about her, and I don't know what it is, but she becomes friends with her students. It's something that happens. I don't know how that happens, but all of her students, they hang out and they're like really good friends after. I'm like, that's interesting. I don't know how that happens. I don't know what DNA trait she has that makes that happen, but something's going on there. And all of a sudden, this one student who used to work with me now works with this one tutor, and they've become friends. So now it's better for the student because she feels like she's hanging out with a friend and not going to class, and that's a better learning environment. So all of a sudden, she's become more committed to learning the language than she was before. So sometimes you can change something around. You can change something about how they're learning. It's kind of like, I have recorded it. It's kind of like, let me share a different thing here. Do I have it handy? No, I don't have it handy. But we did a session about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, about student retention, about having students take classes for an extended period of time. I think it was 2 weeks ago I did that session, maybe 3 weeks ago. And one thing we talked about was like actively listening for student needs and listening for what matters to them in classes, and trying to match their needs with the most appropriate class. So that's something you got to think about, and that might help with that mental committedness. I spelled committed wrong, didn't I? No, I didn't. That mental committedness, it will kind of help with that because you've hit some of the needs that they have within classes, and that'll help them to be more committed. So all of that starts with having a conversation with the student. All that starts with that. So, or students, obviously, also works in there. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go over to question discussion, but first, let me stop this here. So here's what we're gonna do. We've already have some people here in the Google Meet. I see some people watching live on YouTube. You guys are welcome to join us for the second half of this session. Let me stop the screen sharing on Google Meet too. There we go. So people watching on YouTube, I'm going to put a link in the live chat here. Let me copy it. People want to come join us for this non-recorded portion, which is like answering people's questions, going through any challenges you're facing in your classes. We've already got some outcomes that people in the group have. I just put a link in the chat. So feel free to click that link, and you're welcome to come join us. There's about, how many of us are here right now? 7 of us. Yeah, 7 of us are here right now. You guys are welcome to come join us. And yeah, so you two people, goodbye. Nice to see you. Hope you have a good day or good night or good whatever time of day it is for you. And Google Meet people, I'll see you in 7 seconds. Bye-bye.